It is an incredible painting. So to say, everything is working with the sound. Fascinating study, levitation, sometimes known as the blind. A painting in which Schiele famously tries to capture the transitionary state between the living and the dead. Many of you might know it, at least some of you might have seen it before, as it's one of his most famous. Two human figures depicted in a floating state in front of a landscape consisting of ponds, creeks, hills, and mountains. Now, if you look closely, then you see that clearly the existential, the ontological state, the two figures are differentiated. The lower figure is still alive, eyes somewhat opened, feet touching the ground, whereas the second figure is floating above the landscape, blinded. Seemingly, he has lost all contact to earthly, to worldly matters. He's crossed over to the other side. He's dead. Now, as Schiele himself described, as art commentators have since then tirelessly discussed, then the painting unfolds, of course, as I indicated, as a fascinating study of the difference between life and death, study of a process, I'm afraid, that all human beings must one day face, the transition between life and death. But a few weeks back, when I myself was visiting the Leopold Museum in Vienna, I could not help but think that this incredible piece of art, this emblematic even piece of art, today takes on a different meaning, or at least a different set of questions are being imposed on the viewer. At a minimum, that another layer has been added to it. At least, again, that's what I found myself thinking, standing there in the quite chic museum hall, that if one gazes at this painting today, let's say without any prior knowledge of it, without having seen it before, it arguably also looks like a visual commentary of how the human species in a time of global climate change can only survive if it keeps its feet on the ground. Only when the human being fathoms, accepts, embraces, accepts its destiny, its existence even as terrestrial, will it remain alive, whereas it will be floating towards death and extinction and blindness if it remains disconnected from the land, from the soil, from its earthly conditions of subsistence. You can accept or you can discard my little reinterpretation of this piece of art or not, but what is certain is that neither the landscapes nor the human figures depicted here are the same landscapes or the same humans as we thought they were until recently. And neither is the world, and this is fundamentally, I'm afraid, why we are gathered here today, because we have stepped, or maybe rather because we have stumbled into a new world, a world that has changed, a world that has turned into something different, a world in which both our natural, our social, our political, and even our existential landscapes are undergoing an intense, confusing metamorphosis. Some people call this new world the Anthropocene. Some prefer to refer to it as our new climatic regime. Some people use even more specific definitions. But no matter what term we choose, what notion we choose to denote, depict, describe, they all agree on is that we have entered a new period of natural human history, that we live on an increasingly ecologically damaged planet, that the causes are, I'm afraid, anthropogenic, and that the result is an Earth becoming less habitable for several life forms, including that of human beings. It is in the context of these ruptures, in the context of our encounter with this new world, with this new Earth, that Aarhus School of Architecture is proud today to launch our new lecture series, Life Terrains, that in the coming years will seek to investigate how landscapes, let's say, take shape as ecological, architectural, artistical, political, social, and existential phenomena, how they have been shaped, how they've been depicted, portrayed, theorized through history, and how, again, they're currently today changing shape, and how they need to be represented and rethought. In tune with our school, here's a new ecologically oriented curriculum. This is at least our humble, or not so humble, plan that by bringing together leading scholars, practitioners, artists, activists, the series aims at providing students, academics, activists, hopefully also at one moment the public, with a broad interdisciplinary hybrid range of historical and contemporary perspectives on how to understand the transforming character, the complex notion of landscapes, again, how to portray them, how to map them, what they consist of, what it means to inhabit them, and not least, how to defend them in a time of global climate change. Indeed, Earth is shaking. We are shaking with it. Both our external and our internal life terrains are metamorphosing, and it is some of the theoretical, aesthetic, and political dimensions hereof that the series wishes to provide a better understanding of. Question is, of course, where to begin such multifaceted investigations if we are lost on an Earth that turns out to have another form, another intensity, another reactivity than we thought it did, if we are stumbling through landscapes that are different in shape, size, and silhouettes than we assumed, then what do? Well, it's simple. We call the French. This is at least what we have done today, because French people are very clever. They very often have very good ideas, and therefore it is an immense pleasure to welcome today my friends, my colleagues, Frédérique Äit-Touati, Duncan Evennou, whom we are lucky, privileged enough to have again to kick off our lecture series, and who are not only French, but who are even French people specialized in cartographies and maps, in alternative maps, maps of the Anthropocene, maps of another world, experts, that is, in exploring and presenting, portraying, and not least performing another sort of landscapes. More specifically, Frédérique Äit-Touati is a historian of science, a theater director, CNIS, research professor in Paris, specialized in early modern literature, astronomy, sciences of the earth, including cartography, cosmography, and ecology and environmentalism, with books including Fictions of the Cosmos from 2011, Terraforma from 2019 that many of you in here know, and more recently, Théâtre du Monde from 2024. Duncan Evennou is a French performer and director, a graduate from École Normale Supérieure d'Art Dramatique du Théâtre National de Bretagne. They're also very good at long names. In France, and a graduate of the SPEEP Experimental and Political Program at Sciences Po in Paris, artistic director of his Lighthouse company, which since 2018 has developed 6 theater productions exploring different theatrical and performative modes of creation on contemporary subjects, a teacher, not least, of performance art at the Karlsruhe School of Fine Arts, and finally, once again, a student, doctoral candidate at the Teesside University in Ecology and Art. Today, Frédérique and Duncan will deliver their collaborative lecture, Mapping a New Earth, Cartographic and Performative Tools of Exploration, in which they will speak about the evolving relationship between Earth, theater, and cartography in light of contemporary ecological crisis. Given that Frédérique and Duncan's interdisciplinary work, alone and together, already have left a significant mark on contemporary ecological thought, contemporary ecological art, I cannot think of anybody better to start this series, which later this spring will also welcome distinguished speakers such as the painter George Rui, philosopher Emmanuel Kochia, and activist Louisa Neubauer. So again, welcome to Aarhus School of Architecture, welcome to Life Terrains, and please help me in giving a warm welcome to Frédérique and Duncan. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you very much. Nicola, I'm not sure my sound is on.
Is it on?
Let's try. Is it better? No. Yes. Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Nikolai, for this very warm welcome, and thanks a lot to all of you. It's a great, great honor and pleasure to be finally, for the first time, in Aarhus. For me, it's a legend. It's a legendary place. Well, I knew it was the place where Nikolai Schultz was born, first of all, but I also knew it from before because I've been following the work of Anat Singh for a while, and for me, she embedded this kind of international aspect of Aarhus as one of the places in the world where the question of ecology, aesthetics, politics, anthropology, and the contemporary philosophy of nature are deeply intertwined. I'm also very happy to discover your architecture school, where I was invited a few years ago and couldn't come. And the reason why I'm so happy to be here today is, well, despite the fact that I'm not an architect, as you will see, most of my projects actually are linked to architecture in many ways. And I actually spend most of my time, I have to admit, with architects. Last week, I was in the School of Malaquais in Paris, which is one of the leading schools of architecture in Paris, and I was building models with architects. Today, I'm with you, and I wrote a book that I will discuss today, Terra Formare, with two architects, to the point that I sometimes wonder whether I actually completely failed my, professional direction. Maybe I should have been an architect. At least I'm very envious because architects have tools to model space, to make invisible features become visible. And with my friends and colleagues, on stage and on paper, as you will see, we've been hacking some of your tools to create new immersive cartographies and spatial hypotheses. My own tools, as Nikolai said, originally are history of science and theater, and you will see that they link in many ways with the spatial tools of architects. For years, I studied problems of representing the very remote and the very small in the context of the first cosmological revolution. In the 17th century, the scientific tools for exploring remote territories were the telescope and the microscope. Today, we are living through a time that in many ways recalls the period of the cosmological revolution. Our conception of the Earth is undergoing a radical shift, and I think this is the topic, the general topic of our series. What happens with space? Well, we understand that the space we inhabit is not an environment. It's not a container, like this impressive room, but it's, on the contrary, constantly produced by various forms of life. We also understand, and this realization is more tragic, that our relationship to the Earth as an unlimited resource is not sustainable, that we live on a damaged planet, in the words of Anat Singh. And as you will see, Anat Singh will be a running thread through my talk as an homage to Aarhus and her. These profound transformations in the way we conceive our relationship with the Earth have considerable philosophical, political, and economic consequences. Yet, we lack the images to think about them. The project I would like to share with you today participate in this very collective, as you will see, endeavor to re-describe the landscape, to re-describe the terrestrial landscape, to map its new borders and territories. Let's start with this strange 19th century image, which I like. Again, it reminds us very much of this amazing room we are in. Faced with the gap between our perception and this entity, the Earth, that goes beyond us, Western modernity has invented a multiplicity of optical, architectural, cartographic, and conceptual devices to conceive and represent our planet. Atlas, globes, paintings, stages have constructed our image of the world. As I told you, as a historian of science, I have spent years studying this kind of image, the images that make something impossible conceivable, how to put the Earth on stage, how to grasp something which is bigger than us. The problem is that this kind of theater of the world doesn't work anymore, and that will be the topic of my talk today. Why isn't it possible to represent the Earth like that? Well, you will see that it is in the context of this question that I have been developing plays and performances with my company and with Bruno Latour for the past 15 years, and also with Duncan, and also with Nikolai, I must say. So it's a bit of also a friendly gathering today. These experiments have taken several forms, from the performance with several hundreds of participants to the lecture performance with one actor on stage, Bruno or Duncan. Beyond this diversity of formats, these experiments have one thing in common. They explore what I would like to call the heuristic capacity of theater. What I mean by heuristic, it's just the capacity of producing some kind of knowledge. They make the stage a kind of laboratory to explore a new conception of space, which is really, again, our topic. So what I'd like to do with you today is first to suggest that the notion of landscape has not disappeared or should not be discarded, but rather I'd like to suggest three ways in which the very definition of landscape is modified, making it a powerful concept to help us think our current situation. So let me start with these three hypotheses that we have actually tested on stage. Then, in the second part of this talk, I'll share some projects which play upon the notion of living landscapes and expand from these three hypotheses. First hypothesis, we are no longer outside the landscape, we are inside. When we read the various histories of the notion of landscape, particularly in art history, we see that they all associate the emergence of landscape, Landschaft, with the distancing of Western scientific rationality. Landscape is the world seen from afar, like in this photo, by a subject who feels and rationalizes from a distant point of view, external to the object he is aiming at. The problem, and that's the starting point of our work with Bruno Latour, the problem is that this landscape in the distance doesn't remain quiet anymore. It shouts at us, as you can see in this image. It cries, like in The Scream by Munch. So this photo was taken by Bruno Latour on one of our theater tour to Canada, Calgary. And I remember him coming out of the plane and telling us, look, I have seen Gaia scream. The problem is that the Earth, as we conceived it, seems to be changing its shape, its agency, its texture. It reacts to our action, as we have just seen. This new Earth, Bruno Latour named it Gaia, after the term he took from Lovelock and Isabelle Stengers. And this new Earth is very difficult to grasp. You can't put it on stage easily. You can't show it. You can't put it and show it as a landscape. Why? Well, the problem with Gaia is that it doesn't really fit the usual forms of scopic regimes. We have no means of visualizing such an entity. We have no laboratory. We have no petri dish. We have no stage for Gaia. This agent is everywhere, in the same space that we inhabit, without occupying a specific place. It's an agent without an environment, because it is its own environment. In Inside, this is a photo from Inside, the first lecture performance of the terrestrial trilogy that we created with Bruno and my theater company and lots of artists and colleagues, Bruno points a finger at the stage where a blurred, indistinct image is projected. And in fact, he makes a joke about it. He says, look, we are making a show about something which is very unspectacular, which is this blurred image. And he points his finger in order to express one of the tragedies of our time. The most important subject of our time has no representation, no political representation, no scientific representation, and no artistic representation. In many ways, this situation, this tragedy, as Bruno was used to say, was the driving force and maybe the initial motivation behind all our collective work. So Inside, as I told you, is a kind of story of a conversion of the gaze. From the point of view of Sirius, this is the typical way you can imagine the Earth if you are in space, the point of view of Sirius, to a new point of view on the Earth, from the globe to the critical zone. And in order to do that, Bruno, first of all, exploded the globe. He had to break our old images, our old cherished images. So we go in that performance from the classic images of the Earth to new, emerging, disconcerting images. As I told you, we collaborated to do so with architects already, Alexandra Arène and Axel Grégoire, and these are the same women with whom I wrote Terraforma. And it might be interesting, maybe or maybe not, but for you as architect to know that the origin of Terraforma as a book is a show, a performance, a theater play, where we actually tested the hypothesis of a change in space. But as you can see in this show, we didn't really create new images. We were playing around with the problems. We were testing hypotheses. And this hypothesis, as I told you, was how to go from outside to inside, how to go from old icons of the globe to new tentative images. The second hypothesis, we developed it in a second performance. But first, let me rephrase this hypothesis. Landscape is no longer a backdrop, And here I have included some images which I love, but I didn't make that. It's from 18th and 19th century stage models, as you can see, with a wooden frame. And I really like that image because it's, you can see very well here how the old tradition of landscape in painting and the tradition of landscape in theater are actually extremely close. One way of understanding the history of theater architecture, scenography, is to see it as a way to expand landscape from two-dimensional to three-dimensional spaces. And here you can see that very, very much. That's another example of those beautiful maquettes of decor set design. So the second hypothesis I want to discuss now is that landscape is no longer a backdrop, and I show you precisely a backdrop for that. Not surprisingly, the rise of the concept of landscape is linked to the history of painting and theater. Landscape as a scenic space has been largely identified, as you know, with the development of linear perspective and the application of these techniques to pictorial art and stage machinery. Yet, as I was saying, the Earth system sciences tell us that landscape, nature, if I want to use this difficult word to use now, cannot be contemplated as a backdrop. It's a constant interplay of actions and reactions that produce life and its conditions of possibility. There is no longer a spectacle of nature that we can simply admire, but a space that is lived, inhabited, made by the very beings which inhabit it. In our contemporary Theatrum Mundi, theater of the world, Earth is not simply a stage, but a performer, acting and interacting, striving and suffering in an increasingly dramatic planetary plot. I like the phrase, again I repeat it, this is my second hypothesis, landscape is no longer a backdrop. I like this phrase very much because I find it everywhere in contemporary philosophy. If you read like me, and I'm sure you do, Michel Serres' Natural Contract from 1994, this is the first occurrence I found, and then all our colleagues in philosophy, anthropology, environmental humanities, Isabelle Stengers, Bruno, of course, Baptiste Morisot, Emmanuel Kochia, Dipesh Chakrabarti, Anat Singh, Donna Haraway, they all use this very sentence. And this is something that strikes me very much. And not only it strikes me, but I think it's fair enough and indeed important that we, theatre makers, artists, architects, take part in this discussion about the end of nature as backdrop, as decor. This is our skill afterwards. It's not only philosophers who can say that. So I'm very interested, as you can see, to re-literalize, to materialize this metaphor. Nature is not a landscape anymore. What are the implications of reimagining Earth more as a protagonist than as a platform? Well, this is precisely the question we ask in the second performance called Moving Earth. We try to explore, and I will be very brief on that, in what way this animated landscape moves. First, in a scientific way, because it's actually produced by living things. And this is a beautiful image, actually, of Duncan in Odeon Theatre in Paris, in front of an image of Lynn Margulis, one of the biologists who actually made very clear the lively aspect of landscape, the fact that it's been made. But of course, what interested Bruno Latour very much was the political movement of this animated landscape. So here I show you those 3 slides because they actually belong to the same show, strangely enough. It's just 3 different movements: scientific, political, and historical movement. The third hypothesis, and I go on, is we share the theater of the world with other actors. Because if nature is no longer a decor, it's because we are discovering all the other actors who make it with us, within us, and beside us. The living beings make the world they inhabit in a continuous and multiple performance. Again, you will tell me, okay, you're a theater maker, so you use the metaphor of theater all the time. But let me underline the fact that it's not a metaphor only for me. The vocabulary of play, action, drama is not merely metaphorical. It expresses the entry onto the world stage of a new non-human character. I should say non-human characters. It also signals the urgency of an unprecedented situation, that of climate chaos. So if we stop seeing the Earth as an immobile stage, then we need to take advantage of the resources of art, the stage, to help us think about a world that has become active and reactive. In Viral, the third hypothesis and the third play, we explore this idea of contemporary biology again, the idea that we should give back agency to living bodies. Viral becomes a kind of stage laboratory for modeling and interpreting this multi-scalar world. The audience shares space with the actor and the crew. We are all on stage, assembled around a large table. And the space, and again, I describe that a little because I think it's an architectural attempt. The space shifts in scale and meaning. It appears as the soil of Mars, as a petri dish, as a microscope, as an observatory site, as a cell structure, as an anatomical theater. The reason why I'm insisting a little bit on this setting of Viral is that it really functions as an optical instrument. And as you will see now, there is a very strong link for me between these theatrical endeavors, experiments, and the second experience I wanted to share with you today, which is the idea of reimagining Earth as a terra incognita. And this is the Terraforma project that you might be more familiar with. And again, I want to make clear that there is a very strong link for me from the real space of the stage to the cartographic space of the page. So now that we have understood that landscape is not this passive backdrop that we inherited from the history of art and theater, what do we do? How do we move from landscape to territory, for instance, which is, it's of course one of the new terms we could offer to change a bit our vision. What we wanted to do in Terraforma was to represent a territory inhabited by other living beings, which was exactly the problem of Viral. Of course, this calls into question the classic modes of representation, the map, the landscape painting, and it also means adding an extra dimension, the dimension of movement, of life. The set of maps which are presented in the book are what we call potential cartographies. Our hope was not to change from the old atlas to a new kind of atlas, not at all. Our hope was that those maps could be used, discussed, maybe criticized, reworked, and improved. That's why it's been so important for us to share it in different design school, but also architecture school all around the world, because it was really, as the title in French makes clear, a manual, something to be used and to change. My co-authors, Alexandra and Axel, worked for 10 years in an architecture agency called BASE in Paris. Most of the time, they were asked to work on ruined landscape, as you will be, for sure, as young architects. They were asked to work on damaged territories, post-industrial sites, wastelands, polluted lands, etc. The questions that obsessed them was how to re-inhabit these devastated landscapes. But they were actually always very frustrated with the available tools. Why? Well, they told me, because they had the experience of that. They said, look, the map, as we know them, describe an empty space, a space available to humans, a space available for building anything you want on it. To describe the Earth again in a different way, as a living landscape, means, first of all, to try to fill in the maps, to bring back into them the multiple life forms excluded from the geographical imagination. To explore the terrestrial landscape again, therefore, is to attempt to inhabit a space that is already inhabited by others, non-human entities that share and shape the Earth with us, terraforming it. And terraformer, you have noticed the shift in meaning, maybe, that we are making with the term terraforming. Normally, terraformer is conceived as an ultra-technical process. This is, for instance, the terraforming of Mars. This is also an old science fiction theme. As you will see, I'm completely a fan of science fiction, and this explains a lot, actually, in Terraforma. Terraforming normally means, if you have seen some science fiction film recently, it's supposed to transform the atmosphere, the climate, to make it habitable by humans. What we have done is to capture this imagination of science fiction back on Earth, in a way. In our book, terraforming is defined as a terrestrial activity shared with other living beings. So that's the project, basically, and I won't be too detailed about it. We can discuss it afterwards. But just to give you a sense of how we started, it's a thought experiment. Let's imagine the Earth as an unknown planet. Let's imagine that we are going to explore the cosmos, a new planet. Could the Earth be discovered again, differently? Could the images we have of it be renewed? Like travelers, we had to equip ourselves. But if we wanted to get out of the traditional cartographic references, we had to build new tools. And this is a big part of Terraforma, actually, the making of new tools. Observation tools, descriptive tools, graphic tools. And here, maybe if you want later, we can enter into the details of the making of those tools. I go quickly on that, the making of tools. One little thing that I like to add, though, because it's not so clear in Terraforma, in the book, is that our main inspiration comes from the history of optics. And here you can see why the history of science is important. I was very much interested in a 17th century guy called Robert Hooke, who discovered how to use the microscope. And in Terra Forma, this is a recurring reference. The idea was just to build new lenses, new optics, to look differently. In other way, the idea is very simple. If you want to describe differently the landscape, maybe you should invent new optics, new lenses. The manual is structured in 7 chapters. Each chapter presents a map, which is the result of the invention of a new lens, of a graphic model, to visualize a specific problem. And each of these models slightly modifies one of the traditional tools of cartography. So if you want, it's a very little shift in the traditional tools. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but maybe in order to make the link with theater, I can just add a few sentences. For me, the map is like a stage. It becomes a flexible, open tool that unfolds stories and situations. And it's very important for me to recall that the way we have built these maps is not only optical, not only by hijacking architectural tools, but also by taking on board stories that we were told by people. For instance, that's the optics. For instance, the map called Living Landscape, precisely. This is our topic, isn't it? Living Landscape. It's made from people telling us their way of living. It's made by us listening to stories about how do you make your day, where do you go, what is your habit. It's an inquiry, first of all. So stories are at the beginning of the maps, but they are also, in a way, the result of the map. Because those maps, you can't really read them if nobody explained them to you. Those maps are very controversial as well, because you could say, well, what do you put that here? You know, in a way, they put into question the conventions of representation, of visualization. What I want to underline here is that those maps are negotiation tools, in a way. They are tools for talking, for disputing, for debating. And the other relationship, I think, between cartography and the theater, and the last one I want to underline, is, in a way, with the notion of living landscape, we are trying to find a physical relationship with the territory, made up of movements, displacements, and uses, made up by bodies, gestures, rather than by the all-powerful eye. And as you know very well, I'm sure, the history of cartography is made, first of all, with the primary use of vision. You know, this is this idea of the eagle eye. This is the origin of cartography. What happens if you decide that you include in your tools bodies, movement, time, the kind of things that expand, again, vision to other parts of the perception? What we do by doing these little shifts I was telling you about is to move from the point of view to the point of life. And here we stole the concept of our friend Emanuele Coccia, who made his book Life of Plant with the idea of point of life. And we discussed a lot with him what it means in terms of cartographic tool. I just want to finish, maybe if I have another 5 minutes, I just want to finish with this. and with funny images I found for you this morning. My last point, in a very shortened way, could be called towards a terrestrial aesthetics. At the end of the performance, Moving Earth, Bruno makes a drawing that he called the political planetarium. It shows the various political positions that attract or repel us as little planets. I don't have the time to do the whole description of that. You have to come and see Duncan performing it in one of our tools if you want to have the whole thing. I just want to insist on exit and security. When Bruno drew that little planetarium, which was in 2019, and at that time already, he could identify the planet of Elon Musk that he called Exit, the guy who wanted to go up to Mars, and he could identify quite easily as well the planet called Security by the guy already called Trump. And of course, as you all know, the two planets have merged in one. We are now facing a monster, the Trump-Musk planet, which combines and adds the characteristics of both nationalism, protectionism, populism, misogyny, the conquest of Mars, extractivism, virilism, etc., etc. The question, of course, that we are facing, and again, I won't try to answer that today, but I just wanted to throw it with you because I think that we should discuss that together with all our tools, is really how to fight this big, frightening monster planet. This is one question we discussed a lot with Nikolai a few years ago, how to fight against this fake aestheticism of Mars as a attractive planet. What strikes me in what happens now, and again, I'm talking as a lover of science fiction, is the way in which the guys around Musk and Trump are actually capturing the imagination of space in a way which reminds us very much of the 60s and 70s images of the conquest of the cosmos. This is a very vintage, beautiful image from the 70s. And if you put that and that, which is Musk project, real project on Mars, in terms of architecture, I think it's quite interesting. I find that quite striking. So I just wanted to finish my talk with this remark that this very old imagination, science fiction of the 70s, is coming back in those new AI images, which are trying to make us desire this planet by building, and again, architecture is at the center of the question here, by building those fake images of a possible habitable Mars. You see what I mean? I just wanted to finish with this very cheesy image of the perfect Mars flat. Just a few words to conclude. This science fiction images, they actually mask a problematic ideological continuity between the 70s and now. They just transpose an extractivist, colonialist imagination of space. It's a very, very old vision of the future. In this imagination, the universe is seen as an extension of terrestrial resources to be exploited. And this vision, of course, is explicitly anti-terrestrial. It sees the Earth not as a unique place to be preserved, but as a temporary point of departure, a springboard towards wider horizon. So what I want to say, just as a last word, is really that for me, this aesthetic question of how do we represent the Earth, how do we represent the cosmos, is an essential question. The question of reclaiming the imagination, reclaiming the aesthetics. Yeah, and I just want, for the memory of us all, of us three of all, to share with you this image of our friend of Fontaines DC singing in front of an empty theater during COVID, and it was our first version of Viral. We were trying to put back on Earth this imagination of cosmic landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frédérique. Do you hear me? Thank you very much. Does it go through? Thank you very much, Frédérique, for setting the framework by destroying the idea of a frame, by situating us within landscapes. 5 minutes, just quick break, so Duncan can set up his stuff, and then we move on.